Alright guys, today we're making an ultimate class tier list for hardcore servers. Now the thing you need to understand about making a tier list is it comes with its own complications. We actually made this tier list on stream, and what became very clear to me is it's absolutely impossible to get everyone to agree on one tier list. Nonetheless, I have given it my best shot. This is the tier list that the majority of people did agree with. But remember to only take this tier list with a pinch of salt, as a rough indication of what classes are going to be better than others. Generally, the further you go up the tier list, you're basically less likely to die and f*** up. But when it comes to the hardcore challenge, there's so many different variables to consider. It's much more difficult than just evaluating classes based on leveling speed. Because a classic example is the Druid. Like, Druid are really good at leveling in the open world, but when they go into caves, they're at much more risk because they can't use entangling routes while indoors, so their main way of escaping death has been taken away from them. So as you can see, it does get pretty complicated. The hardcore challenge really is a challenge of your patience as a player, and certain classes are going to be more punishing if you have less patience. Some classes are just better adapted to a player's impatience. I can tell you now, if you're impatient while playing a warrior, you're very likely to die. If you're impatient while playing a hunter, you can probably still survive by sacrificing your pet. And no matter how patient you are, what will inevitably happen is bad RNG. You will end up in very sticky situations where you pull more mobs than you intended to do. And then certain classes are just better at dealing with sticky, bad RNG situations than other classes. So this is how we evaluate classes in a hardcore tier list. How much does it forgive you for being impatient and trying to rush? And secondly, how good is the class at dealing with bad situations? And we also need to evaluate how certain classes are more prone to making stupid mistakes. So this is the tier list that we came up with on stream. We also did agree that certain classes can definitely move up and down depending on player skill and also depending on different situations, like whether you're in a cave, whether you're in the open world, or dungeons. But we agreed this is a pretty cozy list, and it's going to be particularly useful for people who are new to the hardcore challenge. The higher up the list, you probably are going to be more likely to survive. One way that you can massively increase the chances of you actually surviving is getting the Rested XP hardcore version of the leveling add-on, because that will tell you the ultimate best, safest route to level up while doing a hardcore challenge. It's made by people who have absolutely no life the hardcore challenge for the past 3 years. So definitely check that out in the description down below. You can get a discount code with MetaGoblin. So S tier, we all agreed that the Warlock is just build diff. The Warlock is just slightly better than every other class in the game, and I think most people would agree on this. Now, if you're going patiently and just going one mob at a time with the Drain Tank build, you would have to try pretty hard to die doing that, because you just have so much ridiculous survivability. It's almost like having your own personal pocket healer constantly. Your pet takes most of the damage, and then you're going to drain your health into mana, but then also just get the health back with drain life anyway. You can sacrifice your pet if you need to run away, whether you're going to use the pet to absorb aggro of everyone away, or you can actually physically sacrifice the pet with the, Void Walker sacrifice ability, which is a huge bubble on the Warlock, and you can also cast during it. And you can even Hearthstone if you wanted to. By the way guys, if you want to totally remaster the graphics of the classic era client, I have a very simple and detailed written guide that all subscribers can basically get access to. If you just subscribe to the channel and check my subscriber only trailer, you will find it there. For A tier, first of all we have the Mage. Now the Mage are just great because if you play patiently and you play very well, you shouldn't actually ever take damage, realistically, because you've got Frost Nova and Frost Bolt to kite the mob infinitely. If you're doing stupid AoE stuff, then you are very likely to die, particularly if you're new to playing a mage. It's not something I'd recommend when doing a hardcore challenge unless you're some kind of Giga Chad or you're actually insane, you should just level normally as a mage and just level in Frost and keep it safe. You also have Blink and Polymorph to very easily evade enemies, and then eventually you will have Ice Block too. Now the Druid, the great thing about the Druid is that they don't use mana to deal damage because they can just swap into cat form, which means they're always saving their mana. They pretty much always have mana to heal themselves, which makes their survivability just great. The only downside to a Druid, why I wouldn't personally put them in S tier, is you can't use Nature's Grasp and Tangling Roots in an interior location. So when you are in interior locations, it's scary. It's much more scary than playing other classes, like for instance a Paladin, because a lot of time as a Paladin, when you're in the interior location, you can bubble herf out if things get sticky. The Paladin has a number of great cooldowns to evade difficult situations when you pull too many enemies. The only real reason why I would put a Paladin lower than a Druid is because they have to hard cast their heals, which can be irritating, particularly if you have 2 mobs on you. Then yeah, it takes a while to get that heal off, whereas a Druid can just cast instant hots. Now the Hunter, you might be surprised, well, why is the Hunter not in S tier? Well, the reason why we put in the Hunter in S tier is because if you actually look at hardcore statistics, a lot of people die on the Hunter. In fact, let me get that up right now. As you can see, a lot of people die playing a Hunter. I mean, it's nearly 20% of all deaths are people playing Hunter. I think that's because people think Hunter is great because they have a pet. Yes, that is true. And the problem is the pet very often can get you killed. This happened to me when I recently did the hardcore challenge of my Hunter. My pet ended up not jumping down with me or porting down to me like they normally do, and ended up going a long way and pulling about 50 mobs. You got to be careful of situations like that. You really do need to perfect pet control. And then yes, the Hunter is very strong because they do have a pet. The Priest are surprisingly quite beefy for a clothy caster. A lot of the time they are in a bubble and they barely take any damage, and because they primarily rely on their wand to do DPS, they normally always have mana available for when they do get into sticky situations. The only issue is when your bubble is on cooldown and Inner Fire has fallen off, then you are very, very squishy. And if you run out of mana, yeah, that is going to get difficult. Yes, you can Psychic Scream to escape enemies, but Psychic Scream comes with its own risks because it is a fear ability. And sometimes you really just cannot use it because it's just going to make your situation even worse. Whereas a Paladin, for example, can Divine Shield and bubble out, if you know what I mean, when they're in sticky situations where they've run out of mana. Now, we disputed a lot whether the Shaman is better than the Rogue. I think the Shaman and Rogue are pretty equal. Now, the Rogue is great. They have so many tools to escape death and to make their lives easier. And their damage is really good, particularly when you get the precision talent, because obviously that increases your hit pretty much to the point where you are never going to miss with your main hand or your abilities. And if you're really, really patient and only ever enter difficult situations when you have Vanish available, then yeah, it'll be pretty difficult to die on a Rogue. The problem is when you do not have your cooldowns, you are bang in trouble. Now, the reason why the Shaman isn't in A tier is because a lot of their casts, well, pretty much all their healing abilities apart from Totem, they're all hard casted. And, one of the problems of that is you don't have any shields or anything to, help you cast. So if you have a couple of mobs on you, it's going to take you ages to get a healing ability off. They do get much stronger at level 40 when they can equip Mail Gear, because that's when they get much more beefy. And you do also have Earthbind Totem, which can be very useful at escaping enemies, particularly as in a hardcore challenge, obviously mobs will not chase you as far. So one of the issues in the original classic is Earthbind would keep re-leashing the enemy. So yes, it slows the enemy, but then it resets the mob to the point where, basically it's gonna make the mob run after you for much longer and much further. But now that doesn't necessarily happen as bad, if that makes sense, because mobs will have a maximum range where they will eventually give up running after you. And lastly, we have the Warrior. Now, there are some great things about playing a Warrior. I wouldn't be discouraged by playing a Warrior just because I've put it in C tier, because I still think they are quite strong. They have great damage, first of all. they do kill mobs very fast. It's just they have, you know, no self-healing or any, like, well, they do have defensive cooldowns, but normally they're huge. And they don't really have any escape tools apart from hamstring and fear, which are obviously not that great, particularly as fear can sometimes make the situation even worse. And this is the reason why when I leveled a warrior, I actually leveled it in protection. Now that might seem crazy, like that's just going to take so long, but weirdly it doesn't, because you take much less damage, which means you stop and eat much less. So really, it just feels as fast as leveling a normal spec warrior like Fury or Arms. Plus you have great cooldowns like Concussion Blow, 5-second stun, you have a stun chance on Revenge, you also have Last Stand, which is a huge HP cooldown. In the lower levels you actually have a kick ability to obviously interrupt casters because you're using a shield, and you can just use, don't know why I forgot the name of that ability, Shield Bash obviously. So yeah, my advice is don't knock leveling as a protection warrior, particularly as just having a shield equipped is amazing. It is built diff. You will find yourself just way less scared or in less scary situations